Today we are diving into a really fascinating study from JAMA Psychiatry. It digs into the link between how our body manages energy and depression, and honestly the findings could fundamentally change how we think about diagnosing this condition.
So this entire investigation kicks off with a central puzzle in psychiatry. You have one diagnosis, major depressive disorder, right? But how can it make one person completely lose their appetite while another person starts overeating? How can it cause both insomnia and make someone sleep all the time? Are these just random variations, or is there something much deeper going on here?
Well, think about it. On one hand, you've got that classic melancholic picture, loss of appetite, can't sleep, feeling agitated. But then on the other hand, you have the atypical presentation, sleeping too much, eating too much, and that heavy, leaden feeling in your arms and legs. This study puts forward a bold idea. Maybe these aren't just superficial differences. Maybe they're actually distinct biological subtypes, each with its own unique root cause.
Here's our roadmap for unpacking all of this. First, we'll explore the core theory about a brain energy crisis. Then, we'll look at the cutting-edge genetics they use to test it, and of course, dive right into the results. And finally, we'll see how this all leads to a new subtype of depression and what it means for the future of treatment. Okay, so let's get right into the central hypothesis of this paper. The big idea is that for some people, depression isn't just a mood disorder. It's a fundamental breakdown in the body's entire energy regulation system. So the idea is to think of your brain as the CEO of your body's energy budget. It's constantly getting these reports from all over the body, signals about metabolic stress carried by hormones like insulin and by markers of inflammation. It processes all this data in key areas, like the hypothalamus and the insula, all with one goal in mind, keeping you alive by managing energy efficiently. But what happens when those signals get garbled? Well, chronic inflammation or insulin resistance, they can act like static on the line. They can trick the brain into thinking the body is in a major energy crisis. It's kind of like your phone falsely telling you it has 1% battery left. And what does the brain do? It hits the panic button and triggers a drastic energy-saving mode. It forces you to conserve energy through lethargy and oversleeping, and it tries to bring in more fuel through overeating and craving carbs. So that's the theory. It sounds plausible, right? But how on earth do you actually test if this energy crisis is the real biological driver for these specific depression symptoms? Well, that's where the researchers turned to genetics, and they used an incredibly powerful method to do it.
They used a technique called genomic structural equation modeling. Now, that's a mouthful, but in simple terms, it's a statistical tool that lets scientists look at the genetics of a whole bunch of different traits all at once. It helps them find the common genetic architecture that they all share. It's kind of like finding the one root system that's feeding several different plants above ground.
And this is exactly how they put it into practice. They took genetic data from nearly 700,000 people and analyzed the shared genetic risk for things like body mass index, inflammation, triglycerides, glucose, the hormone leptin, and even anhedonia, which is the loss of pleasure. From all of that, they built a single factor, a polygenic score, that basically represents a person's genetic risk for having their energy regulation system go haywire.
Okay, so now we get to the core of the study, the really exciting part. They took this brand new genetic score for energy dysregulation and asked a simple question: can it predict specific depressive symptoms in thousands of patients?
And the answer was a huge, resounding yes. What they found was a powerful and, very importantly, a highly specific genetic link between this energy regulation factor and those atypical, energy-conserving symptoms of depression.
Now, what's just incredible here is the sheer strength of this finding. A higher genetic score for this energy problem was associated with a 2.25 times higher odds of having an increased appetite during a depressive episode. That is a massive effect. The p-value was 10 to the minus 40, which for those who aren't statisticians means this result is about as far from a random fluke as you can possibly get. The odds for oversleeping also went up, though a bit more modestly.
But this is what makes the findings so convincing. The genetic score didn't just predict what would happen, it also predicted what wouldn't happen. The very same genetic factor that so strongly predicted an increased appetite also made classic melancholic symptoms, like a loss of appetite, significantly less likely. This mirror effect is a huge deal. It confirms we're really looking at a distinct and biologically coherent subtype of depression.
So, the genetics are painting a very clear picture. And that leads us to a whole new concept. What does this distinct biological profile actually look like in a real patient?
Now you might be wondering, wait a minute,
Why was a mood symptom like anhedonia, the loss of pleasure, included in a metabolic calculation? Well, this is the missing link. When the brain thinks it's in an energy crisis, it has to reprioritize. So it literally downgrades the reward value of doing things to conserve that precious energy. And clinically, we experience that shutdown as anhedonia.
And when you put it all together, you get this complete picture, which the researchers have named immunometabolic depression. It starts with a core physiology, high BMI, insulin resistance, and elevated inflammation. This then leads to a behavioral output, overeating and oversleeping. And it's all driven by that underlying mechanism we talked about, a failure in the brain to properly read the body's energy status, which forces it into that energy conservation mode.
And crucially, this is not just a mental health story. This shared genetic factor for energy dysregulation is what you'd call a transdiagnostic failure. It shows a really strong genetic correlation with type 2 diabetes. We're talking a correlation of 0.74, and heart failure at 0.66. This is a direct genetic line connecting this specific subtype of depression to major cardiometabolic diseases.
You know, uncovering a biological root cause like this is a massive step forward, because it opens up an entirely new path for treatment.
This could finally help explain the so-called treatment gap. Think about it. If the fundamental driver of a person's depression is a metabolic signaling failure, then a standard antidepressant that targets serotonin might be missing the mark completely. This could be exactly why so many patients with these symptoms get labeled treatment-resistant. Maybe they aren't resistant to treatment in general, they're just resistant to a treatment that doesn't address their specific underlying biology.
So what's the bottom line here? First, depression is not just one disease. It clearly has distinct biological subtypes. We now have a clear profile for one of them, immunometabolic depression, which is fundamentally a problem of the body's energy regulation system. Second, this subtype isn't just in the mind. It is genetically linked to physical symptoms and serious diseases like diabetes. And maybe most importantly, these findings could pave the way for brand new, targeted treatments that finally address the metabolic root of the problem.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really powerful question to think about. This study is a huge step toward what we might call precision psychiatry. So if we can finally move from classifying depression based on symptom checklists to classifying it based on its underlying biology, just imagine, how might that completely revolutionize the way we diagnose, treat, and maybe even prevent mental illness in the future?